everybody knows who both of these great individuals are and their commitment to adolescent girls, and to have their voice be on this platform is a tremendous opportunity for Dasra, but for all of you to be able to ask questions of how both of them have thought about their giving and strategically giving to adolescent girls. They were ahead of the curve and continue to be, and so I'm not going to talk very much and basically throw open the question, which we have loved hearing through the day from a number of other philanthropists, is tell us a little bit about your journey. And I know you've said this many times as well, but I think it's always very inspiring to hear it. How you thought about your giving, why'd you think about girls? You know, it's now on the agenda more than it was at the time that you decided. What was the process that you went through? And yeah, tell us.
Yeah. Do you want to start? First, I just want to say thank you for this amazing opportunity. We were speaking earlier, just in the little room back there, about after we were looking at the day, about how monumental and amazing it is, and what a change to see sort of a lineup of what you've been immersing yourselves in all day, and this work is really top of mind and top of agenda. And that is incredible. That is really something to be celebrated. We have a lot of work to do, but that is really a change from 7 years ago, I have to say, when we got into this work. But maybe I'll let, not even maybe, I'll let you start. And I want to thank Dasra just for having us back in person, live in person, and not at 5 in the morning.
Yeah, that's true. It was early. Well, I guess I'll start with the fact that I'm my father's son, and that's how this sort of happened. He had always planned on giving all his money away, and so that was no surprise. But in 2006, he made the announcement, which was a bit of a surprise. We didn't think it was going to happen while he was alive, and we weren't sure how any of us, meaning my siblings and I, would play a role in it. And so when he decided, we had a smaller foundation before. He was kind of priming the pump to see if we were at all interested really in how we would take to it. But in 2006, in fact, he did what I call the big bang, and he gave it all away. And we were suddenly charged at that point. It was $1 billion foundation. It's become over 3 at this point. And I always like to point out that it's amazing when you have $1 billion foundation, you're better looking, your jokes are funnier, but it is an issue around the power dynamic, which we can get into later. But what we realized at that time is that we really had to think about this. This was not a small foundation anymore that we could sort of handle ourselves. And so we had felt for a long time, from various work in our personal lives, professional lives, that the world was very out of balance. It was very clear. It struck us that it was fundamentally running in what I would call a masculine frame, even though men are not bad people. But there's an aspect...
Masculine and men
aren't the same thing, exactly.
So,
and but there was a overarching frame of exploitation and domination and control and various things that, again, I'd worked in the American Indian community for a long time. I'd seen it reflected in a number of ways. And so we felt that the most efficient, essentially, investment, to speak in those terms, was going to be in girls and women, and adolescent girls in particular, because they represent the mother of every child. I mean, that's one thing nobody can argue with. Only a woman is going to be the mother of every child. And so that was clear, and we saw that it was also something that wasn't being done, and that was the only directive my dad gave, really, is to go places where people aren't going. And so that seemed like the perfect formula, where we're going places where people don't seem to be going with their money, and it seemed like a clearly efficient, essentially, again, investment. And I reflected on my dad's strategy, really, with investing. And what he did when I was a kid, and still does today, is he would pore over very patiently. You know, he took his time looking at all these businesses, waiting until he could perceive through his own, framing, the undervalued asset. And he knew that if he invested in that asset and took as much time as it, he didn't care if it was months, years, decades, eventually the market would recognize and the value would rise. And essentially that is an adolescent girl. She is the undervalued asset in this world. And if we invest in her, she'll do the rest. Again, my dad didn't go in there and tinker with anything. He just recognized, if I invest in this thing and I wait long enough, it's going to rise on its own because it has a lot of value. And that is every girl everywhere. She doesn't need empowering. She's got the power. We need to create the conditions so the existing power can actually be exercised.
But this isn't really the world that we saw. I mean, I love that Peter had this aha, we both did, moment, and came to this conclusion. But through our work and through traveling a lot and seeing a lot of NGOs and a lot of work, it was sort of like, someone said it was sort of like the dirty little secret of the NGO world and foundation world. No one was saying this, that adolescent girls are the answer. And yet, I spent time in Rwanda, I think in 2005 it was, and I saw that every household was being led by, because of the war and the genocide, by a 16-year-old girl who had 7, 8 kids in her home and no support. And we would go and travel to all kinds of places and situations and see this, yet that's not where the resources were going. They weren't going to her, she wasn't supported, and yet, the entire, future generations rested on what she had to offer, can bring to the fore. So this was outraged us horribly. I mean, and what we learned about the rates of violence, the lack of support. I know you just had a panel or a session on early marriage. I mean, these things, when you start to peel away the layers of the onion, point to such an erosion of the feminine and of the valuing of what women and girls bring to our world. And it was quite a painful realization for us. But once we saw that, we had to be involved. We had to make this a priority. We teamed up with the Nike Foundation, who did a lot of communications around this and a lot of breaking it down for institutions like the World Bank and others, who would say, girls, oh, that's a side thing that you do in communities, or we don't understand, or whatever. But so
it's changed.
Yeah.
Which is great.
Yeah, tell me more. How has it changed? And earlier today we spoke a lot about collaborations and partnerships. And I would imagine when you sort of came out with the declaration that we're going to support adolescent girls, did it seem risky? Did you feel like you were kind of lonely in this, or did you feel like if we can influence, this is going to be the place?
All the above.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. I was just going to say that.
Yeah.
Yes. Not so much risky, but certainly a little bit lonely. And, we always felt that we had 3 at-bats, essentially. We had the money with the foundation. We had our last name, which could potentially create a little traction in some way or get some attention in some way. And also our behavior, most importantly, how we behaved. And that gets back to the dynamic around money and how can we try and dissolve that. But also, how can we find partners and collaborators? And while we all will say that it's changed around adolescent girls in terms of the profile and the significance in terms of the importance, I'd be curious to know how much it's actually changed in terms of dollars and effectiveness, because it takes a while. Everybody can say it now, but it's still, are people doing things? And yes, it's improved, no question, but there's a long way to go.
For sure. Judith Bruce from the Pop Council says, whenever you give a girl an asset, there's someone right there to take it away from that girl. And we talk about, girls start to make some income and they invest that back in their families. And so it is this constant, I think, struggle and tension of supporting girls, but then there's someone to take it away or to use what she brings or to tap on her to do domestic chores, or, there are many, many burdens on adolescent girls, and this has been going on for a long time. And we got to be realistic. This isn't going to happen overnight. It's not going to change overnight.
How did you structure the foundation and sort of your engagement in it? And I know that you have a great team that's running a lot of the programming, but how did you think about it and where are you at now? Because I know that we have a lot of young philanthropists, we have more mature philanthropists in the group here that also need to think about and sort of be advised on.
Can I talk first? I mean, I think it's so important to roll up your sleeves and get dirty and travel and not just have somebody hand you talking points, which people actually proposed that they would do that with us, and we thought, no, we have to go see for ourselves. We have to learn. We have to talk to people, and we showed up with a lot of humility and really wanting to listen and learn and go on the journey. And I don't think there's anything that you can do to substitute that. It's so important in the early phases of your foundation work and to really learn is to not just read about it or be separate from it, but to really show up and engage and build trust and talk to people about their lives. And I think when you do that, first of all, it makes your journey so much richer, but you're going to do such better work if you do that. I think to fast forward to now, we were so in the weeds and the details. We were traveling all over the place. We were immersing ourselves. We were going to everything. That has changed somewhat because now we feel confident and know the things that we want to do, and you hire people and you delegate and you build an organization to that. And I think we have a much better organization than we would have had we not really put in that. It's just like a business owner. You want to have been the one that swept the floors and sort of did everything and understand your business so intimately, and then you manage it. And I think that we had the same attitude. And now we're into something, maybe you can speak on this, we're really looking we think ourselves as sort of like looking for pattern recognition, for what are the patterns, what are we seeing, how do we step back and or up 33,000 feet and look at what is the vision we have for the world, what are the metaphors that drive and guide us and things like that, and then really keep the DNA of the foundation alive and help build the culture and get everybody in the sort of shared vision and values of the foundation and keep that fire ignited.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the word specifically that Jennifer used was humility, and that is key. The colonial mind is it gets in there in ways, and to really catch that every time you think you might know somebody else's problem or answer to their problem, and realize you don't, and you have to visit. After our first trip to Liberia and Sierra Leone, I came back and said, you won't know if you don't go. I mean, you cannot do it any other way. And then you won't know if you don't listen. And it's so, for us, it was, we talk about everything coming from the ground up in terms of how we're trying to fund and everything else. Well, it's true with the foundation as well. I mean, we had to build it from the ground up. We saw things, we thought about things, and then we hired people, once we knew what we wanted to do. And that was a huge plus. A lot of people come in, for instance, at the Ford Foundation, with an established institution in place, and that's a different animal. And we were very fortunate that we had nothing in place, and we could think about what we wanted to do, how we wanted to do it, where we wanted to go, and all that, with always, again, humility at the fore, and that's key in giving.
If you don't mind, share some more insights. You were saying you're coming more big picture, trying to figure out what it is that you really care about, where it should go. Yeah. What is your sense of a few things, if you don't mind sharing?
Well, like Jen said, again, the pattern recognition has been fascinating because we are so lucky to have first gotten down in the weeds and seen and experienced and listened the way we did. But now we have this phenomenal staff. Always hire people smarter than you, which we've done plenty. And so we can entrust them to keep the culture fully intact and alive. And we're very connected to everyone. It feels like a small family. It's beautiful. And then we can sort of step back and start to see patterns. I mean, Francis Bacon had it all wrong. I mean, the idea that you can reduce to get the answer is not true. You can reduce to get the information and learn, but then you have to back up again and start to see how these things all interact. We are living in natural systems, and natural systems do not exist in isolation. Everything's connected. And when you start to see, economic justice, social justice, environmental justice, healthcare, all these different things start to weave, education systems, agricultural systems. It's all, frankly, kind of a mess, but not overwhelming if you kind of, again, step back and find, we think of it sort of as acupuncture. In terms of trying to go in and figure out where we can put dollars to release energy that will allow this body of humanity to get a little more healthy. But it's all interconnected, and I think it's super important. What we're finding is we started not wanting silos, but starting to fall into a little bit of siloed thinking, but immediately said, this is wrong, this is all connected, and we have to stay up here where we can and find out, how to partner with people that understand this kind of thinking and work in ways that are in fact an ecosystem approach, essentially.
I also think, to build on that we are so, in philanthropy, we get our areas of interest we care about, which is what we should be doing and is natural to do. But that doesn't necessarily mean that then you go and treat that symptom, or that you come at it with,
because it is a symptom,
the logical, like we just have to get girls in school, or we just, and so for us now, we're starting to see, because we spend a lot of time thinking about this and looking at the world, and looking at things more holistically and in an interconnected way. We care about so many different things. We care about the degradation of the planet, trafficking of women and children, economic justice. I mean, that's happening with climate change, on and on. And when you can step back a little bit, you may enter these spaces a little less, like you said, siloed, and a little more holistically to think about what you would start to put your money or energy or time into building. Or just like if somebody comes to the doctor with a whole host of symptoms, you wouldn't necessarily treat those symptoms. You want to have a little more of a holistic perspective, considering the emotions of that person, the spirituality of that person, the body, what their story is, all these things.
The home life.
So that's the kind of role I think we're trying to play right now, is to really step back, look historically, systemically, holistically at what's going down in terms of the breakdown of many things and how we would use our relatively small resources to make a potent difference.
And tell me a little bit about how you look at being able to measure that. So we've talked a lot today about measurable outcomes and impact, and that needs to lead where the giving goes. But where you're starting to move and what you're talking about, it is next to impossible to have that. And are you leading with, we don't need to, let's figure this out? What's your thinking on that?
I think it's more about what happens in the process, less the result. And I think you can see, we can all have an intervention, and you start to see results right away. Anytime there's an action, there's a reaction, no matter what we do. But we're thinking it less so much like intervention, result, boom, we're done, to intervention into a system. Things take time. Like you would, the metaphor I use for philanthropy, and that guides me every single day that I love, is the garden metaphor. So you want to grow a garden of a variety of things that you want to harvest for your family, for your best nutrition for yourself and your family and your garden. It's going to take some time. You don't plant a seed and you have an eggplant or a tree or whatever it is, right? And that is the kind of way I think that we're looking at results, is how can we set up a garden where we've gotten a sense of the quality of the soil. So at a foundational level, is it a junkyard we're working in? Has the soil been completely depleted? What do we need to do to bring back the health of the soil that's not going to create a whole host of other problems? And then what kinds of things do we want to plant? What maybe should we plant first next to other things, and so on and so on and so on. So I think we love to, in our modern day age, have sort of input, output, return on investment, be able to really measure it. I mean, that would be wonderful if we really lived in that world. I think that's a complete fantasy. So I think that garden metaphor is a way better thing to help you, guide you in your work. And we actually have a farmer that lives in our land. We live upstate, and I was complimenting Jacob, is his name, once, and saying, "You grow such amazing vegetables." And he said, "I don't grow vegetables." And I said, "What are you talking about?" "Yes, you do." And he said, "No, I don't grow vegetables. Vegetables grow themselves. Life grows itself. My job is to go out there and listen and pay attention and say maybe a little bit water here, a little pruning here, whatever, and to tend the garden." So,
yeah, that's great. Yeah, I mean, we talk about, again, at the foundation, creating conditions for change. We don't know exactly how something's going to happen. We can't say to an adolescent girl, you should grow up and be this, but we can give her the opportunity to grow up and be what she's going to grow up and be, and hopefully, Yeah, so it really is, again, especially not measuring inputs, but we tell people on our staff that we may be dead when some of these things happen, in terms of come to fruition. Certainly with girls, it's generational change. It could be 1, 2, 3 generations before the full flowering of these things happen. So, and it's wonderful that more and more business people and business minds are getting into philanthropy, but not if they're expecting quarterly returns. That's the mindset that has to be removed from the business head if they're getting into philanthropy.
And also not to get myopic about it, because you can have, again, you can say we're an intervention and you can measure something that makes you look really successful, but then there's a whole 99% of the conditions are still bleak. But you're measuring this one little thing that says, wow, we've done a great job, great, we're done, we're moving on, so.
Tell us a little bit about your thoughts on India. We're clearly here, 15 years later, realizing that there's an opportunity and that, the world the borders are all breaking down. We're just one big global country of sorts, and that there's a responsibility for all of us. And India plays a significant role in the prosperity of sort of the globe, and adolescent girls being key to that. But what's your take on India? Does it seem like just another country that needs support? Is it?
Oh, I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind is this.
I'm waiting for this answer.
Yeah.
What's your take on India?
Right. We'll come back in a month or something, and I'll talk about it. Well, the first thing that comes to my mind, and obviously I'll talk about this too, but is as an American in a incredibly, relatively speaking to India, young invention of a country, right? And America is kind of an idea. To have maybe to be weary of an arrogance for Americans to go tell India how to do things.
For sure.
I find really distasteful. But I feel like there's such to talk about the positive comment I wanted to make, which is I think we can look to India, who has such a rich history, thousands of years history, and so many incredible traditions, to see how it is going to grow in its unique way in the 21st century and use the opportunities and use the sort of global connectedness. What it's going to do is going to be very different than I think the Western mind would approach or do. It has its own sort of development. I would say it's true about China. I think we're not talking about the same country or petri dish here at all. So, and we were talking a little bit earlier too, just about the, I had a really interesting meeting with a guy who had, some of you may know who this is. He has a book out that he was an MIT student, and he was one of his assignments was to come up with the World Wide Web. Does anyone know who this man is? He wrote a book recently. Anyway, he did, and of course, like MIT, the institutions took all the credit for it, but he had a tremendous amount to do with it, and he was, like a young, not that well-educated guy that came over here, was super talented and did this amazing thing. Anyway, I feel so bad I don't remember his name. Wonderful guy, but he was talking about doing this really neat thing with education around diseases and around different remedies for things, and aggregating all the research around, let's say, a disease or cancer or something. We again look for magic bullets. And there's usually a combination of things, that gets synthesized and that it's the synthesis that we get, the wealth of knowledge or results. And he was telling me, and we all forget this, that our mothers were, and the women were, the greatest doctors, for thousands of years, because they had the children that would get sick, they had the families, they were in charge of the remedies or growing the herbs or whatever. So you have these thousands of years of passed down wisdom and knowledge, and women and girls were the wisdom keepers of that. We've now become so disconnected that it's almost like our technologies replaced that. And I feel like India is, especially when it comes to women and girls, is this incredibly rich arena that I think incredible things in philanthropy are going to happen, and it'll be interesting to see. It already is.
Yeah, I would actually just piggyback on that a little bit in terms of indigenous knowledge. It's been around for tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years. It's the most advanced bit of education we have, actually, is what indigenous people hold. And it's amazing to me that we think these last 150 to few thousand years are the most advanced aspects of ourselves we've ever seen. It's totally wrong, I guarantee you. And so what I hope India can bring to the fore is the thousands of years of history, because if it buys the line that, you know, consumer culture and investment culture and growth beyond all things, you know, if it goes that direction, same with China, same with anybody. It's not about a country, really. It's just about individuals in that country and how they choose to move into the future. Real progress, I think, starting now, will be remembering who we've always been. and India has a fantastic opportunity there. Frankly, I think China does too. If they just will leapfrog back over the last 1,000 years and really start to pull some, again, a phenomenal cultural history that we can all learn from. And that's what I'm hoping any country with that kind of depth will do for us all, frankly.
And one thing, a parallel I would draw between the States and India too is and when you think about and work for social justice, you try to consider the last man or the last girl. And we're so inspired by Gandhi's not only be the change, but last man philosophy, social philosophy. And that is really in danger right now, I think, of not happening. And philanthropists are as guilty of this because we don't know about Native Americans in this country or lower caste populations in India. Or the divide is just becoming greater and greater. And I feel like, I mean, for us personally, we feel like it's really important to remember that and be guided by that, especially now as the world is becoming so, divisive in terms of the haves and the have-nots.
Great. Why don't we open it up for questions? Yes, here to the left. Lynn.
Them from the Kiowa Trust. To risk a bit of rock star adulation here.
Wow.
One of the reasons that we chose to support adolescent girls was because I read a speech that you had given, Jennifer, back in 2010, which just really changed my mind about the importance of this work. So thank you. There is a question coming.
Well, thank
She'll
you.
have T-shirts for sale in the lobby.
Thank you.
What are the sort of 2 or 3 programs that you're working on that you feel most inspired and excited about, and why?
Well, I mean, working with adolescent girls is unbelievably inspiring. People ask me all the time, so who inspires you? Who are your role models? And there's no greater answer than girls. I've seen girls, I mean, Susan Davis is here from BRAC, and there's other girl programming folks in this room. And when you go sit with an adolescent girl and you see just with very little, interventions with a community and a safe place for her to go, and friends and a place to be herself and to express her physical self and her intellectual self and build skills and her confidence, know her rights and all that. There's nothing more inspiring. It's so unbelievably transformational. We're talking somewhat theoretical here about adolescent girls. This makes sense. But when you go and you have a visceral experience of it, it's unbelievable. So that would probably be number 1. And then maybe number 2, and then I would love to hear what you would say too, is this work that we're doing around gender balance and gender stereotypes and putting that on the table, like what is gender and what have we learned about what it means to be a man or a woman and the implications on society for humanity and human beings. I think we have lost so much, and I think it's such critical and important work and a place that philanthropy can go. I can't tell you. If we don't address those very oftentimes unspoken social, cultural norms, I think we're in a lot of trouble. So there's some really exciting work around that in sort of gender relations, the gender question, and social and emotional learning, which is, we have this, a human mind is the most incredible thing, right? An intellect. But at the end of the day, what are the most important skills I think we have in our life is to recognize and manage our emotions and to work together. We're not going to work our way into a better world all by ourselves and as separated competitive individuals, and I think that's really key. So we're doing some really neat work around that as well. Thank you for your question.
And I would say specifically, and it's not because Susan or Cynthia are in the room, but this idea of the last girl, which Gandhi would say the last man, but is so critically important and very difficult to achieve. And so you have to count on others to get all the way into the village and into the home and to the girl. And that's not an easy thing for us in New York in our foundation office to do. We have wonderful staff. They identify organizations like BRAC, like Grassroots Girls Initiative, who then identifies Empower, and and they can get all the way to the ground, and that's so important for us to do, and it takes organizations like that to do it. So I applaud them for doing kind of the last mile, kind of getting really to the girls. That's really important.
Yes, Susan.
So thank you for the commercial.
Yeah, right,
I'm Susan Davis from
Right.
BRAC. They gave me their old office, and the plants are
Wrote a
still
song
alive,
for 'em.
and said, "How can we make your life easier? And would you like would you like to share an office?" And I was like, "Well, yeah." And then they said, "Well, on second thought, would you like our old office? That way you could grow." And I was like, "Well, yeah." And then they called back and said, "Would you like some startup capital?" And I was like, "Yeah."
This is our job.
And then they
everybody,
said,
right?
"Well, should we call up Gates and ask if they want to part?" Yeah. So imagine philanthropists who become your like dream and saying, "How can I help in a company?" That's an amazing role, and it's open to all of us who decide to use our wealth of resources and connections that way. The question that I have, as I've watched you in this amazing journey now, what are these patterns that you're seeing? Now that you've been able to step back, I love the garden metaphor, and I love the acupuncture. So in looking for ways to release some good energy, what are you seeing?
Thank you for that question.
Yeah, go ahead. Sure.
I mean, I feel like we had an amazing conversation this morning about this too, but it comes time and time again, I'm coming to this conclusion. I mean, I feel like if we don't consider the natural world in everything we do, I think then we're just fooling ourselves. We're in some artifice and some, which we are in artifices. This is what we do. We create places, right? And we create, but I feel like this pattern of looking at how we've gotten away with behaving as though the earth is just something to take from indefinitely and forever. We're at the end of that idea. That when this country started, that's what everybody thought. There were endless trees, there was endless land, there were endless resources just for us to take. And I feel like we have to make a shift out of the artificial propping up of everything and getting whether it be girls or other countries or whatever, into this workforce, into this paradigm of the endless growth, the endless, you all understand what I mean.
Right.
And so, maybe. Yeah.
I'm with you.
So the pattern, thank goodness. No, I think the pattern of you is, how do we listen and learn from the wisdom of the natural world and pattern ourselves around that in terms of everything, in terms of how we think about an economy. The economy is nature. Nature is an economy, and it does a really good job of providing, of regenerating. It's super efficient, and we've just sort of plowed over that. We're trying to think about new economic systems. We've had a really good one on the planet for a long time. So whether you're talking about micro, macro, small places, big places, I think that those types of patterns of, again, this sort of artificial design versus a more organic, planet-inspired design about how we go forward together as a human family is the biggest pattern I can talk about.
Which I would say is, if there's a single virus in the system, it's fear. And over the last 150 years in particular, but over the last 10,000 probably in general. And this is not a long time. It sounds like a long time, but I always want to remind all of us, and me included certainly, that we've only been around for a few 100,000 years, the human species as we know it. And a tree, an animal, these are hundreds of millions of years of perfection. Photosynthesis is the best machine on the planet in terms of efficiency. It's been doing it for a really long time. A few more million years and we may get the hang of it. but we're young and we're acting like 2-year-olds. We think the world revolves around us, and it doesn't.
And then we're all separate, and we're not.
We are part of a natural system, and if we have created an education system that's industrial, an agricultural system that's industrial, and economics, it goes on, and this is just a fabrication. And I think if there's another pattern besides fear and everything that Jen was talking about, now I just lost my train of thought. But
don't you love that when 130 people are listening to you?
I know, exactly. It's like, wait a minute,
I
was just going to say something. But it is around this idea, well, it's the idea that this is all a story, that we have all agreed to this. I mean, it is only Monday. It's Monday, right? It's only Monday because we all agree it's Monday. This is just a day. And there are so many agreements that we have in place that are just constructs, that aren't actually real. We can agree to something different. We can agree that a 1% return is okay. That sounds completely radical, but why not? Why do we have to hoard, control, dominate? This is all fear-based stuff. And so what we're seeing as an overarching pattern is that fear somehow is really running the show, and it just doesn't have to. We can all, there's enough for everybody. And then fear goes into consumer culture and design, all this other stuff. And, I know how much money we have in the bank. It's not what most of you think. I will tell you that. We live a very happy life. We are, we have everything we could possibly want. It doesn't take that much. And so I think we really have to flatten things out and, call me a socialist. Let's come up with other words for things, because those words aren't working either. Most of the agreements we have aren't working anymore, and we really have to shift consciousness in a pretty fundamental way, but it's easy to do. We just have to all go, okay, let's do it.
Yes, Tanya, I'll come here.
Thank you. Tanya Jones from the Barr Foundation. You're speaking of agreements, and I was wondering if you could speak to us a little bit about how challenging or simple it was for the two of you to come to the agreement about the mission of the foundation. And I've worked with folks who are in the process of working with their family about what to do next with the wealth that they've inherited. And if you could give us any sort of nuggets of information about that. And then now, 7 or 8 years later, at what point do you expand your board and bring on more people in this discussion to reach your agreements?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'll say one thing quickly, is that my parents did a brilliant thing, which is to say all of the kids, the three of us. Yeah,
I was going to say this.
Okay, yeah.
So great. You were in agreement about even how to talk.
That we have separate foundations. So there was no arguing, well, I'm more important than you, and you always got that when you were a kid, and now, like all these things that could happen. So that was brilliant of my parents. And in fact, we end up working together in ways, or kind of bumping up against each other in complementary ways. So there's that.
No, I think that's great. Yeah. No, I mean, we had to go on the journey together. We didn't know how it was going to be, and that we were going to agree so much. And I remember saying to him, Peter has a music career that was very big and full and all that, and was a little worried about, am I going to lose that? Am I going to lose my identity, myself, the thing I love to do? And I said, please, every single day is going to be like drops of learning, and you don't want to miss out, and we don't want to go like this. So let's do this together. Let's learn together, and we'll know when it's time. And 3 years later, you showed up every day, and we traveled, and we were in the journey together. So when you're in the journey and on the journey together, you don't divert so much.
Yeah, you get entrainment.
And we're so aligned as people. We got married because we have some, we share values and so many things. We see the world the same way, So that helped a lot. I mean,
plus, it's funny actually, because some people would think, and probably still do, girls and women, that must be kind of Jennifer's thing, right? And
I made them.
Crazy.
No.
Yeah, no. I mean, it's just, again, we took this journey, and also our involvement, mine specifically musically, but otherwise with indigenous people, taught us a lot around exploitation
Absolutely.
and domination and all these things that, whether it's literally girls and women or figuratively the feminine, we saw this kind of thing at work. And so we, again, I mean, we're married, so hopefully we did that for a reason. And so that helps. But also, again, with my parents, the idea of separating it out also helped.
Question here, yeah.
Yeah, hi. I just wanted to thank you both. I've never heard you speak before, and actually know very little about NoVo, but it's really inspiring. I mean, you guys are sort of like radical philanthropists, right?
Yes.
In what I think is a non-radical world, right? I mean,
No.
we're sitting in a.
Thank you.
And I guess my question is, one is, it's so great to hear folks like you talk about social movement building and linking the environment and education and girl-child issues to labor issues and social justice issues.
Yeah.
So thank you for doing that. My question is, how are you sharing this with your peers who I know are maybe not as far along in the journey or even interested in taking the journey? And how is it that the response has been?
Mm-hmm.
Well,
we're here.
We're here.
So
Forums
that's
like this.
one.
We're here.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And you should
Yeah.
answer this because of your op-ed.
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, I've been a musician all my life, so I'm sort of naturally a broadcaster of some sort. So I enjoy that. I enjoy talking, and I do a lot of things with my music and speaking in general, which led to an op-ed last year in the New York Times, which some of you may have seen, which I will say on the if you only did a search on it, you'd probably see, I don't know how many people being critical, but what most people didn't see is the hundreds, if not thousands, of emails I got of support, right? So it was fascinating to see what a chord I struck, not knowing that I was going to strike it. And so that felt good and empowered both of us, I think, to talk more. And we are going to continue to do that. And the trick is, the name attracts attention, or it can certainly, so that's good, but we don't want it to be about us, right? So there's this funny tension between us being the mouthpiece but trying to put the spotlight somewhere else. And so that's our challenge, is how to speak effectively, and this would be a perfect example of it, where we're talking to peers and some like-minded, some not, who knows, but we can put our particular point of view out in the world, and then again kind of create conditions for potential shift. But I grew up in the 60s, and my parents were both very social justice oriented. So when I was 8 years old, I was in an environment that was activated by Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement and all this stuff. So I felt that in my being, because it was around me. And I think that's why I get so excited when you say we're radical philanthropists, because my dad loved the op-ed. He's very excited that we're going out there and pushing the envelope if we can. So thank you.
I mean, if we can't all be radical, then
Yeah,
and the world is calling for it.
If you're not living on the edge, you're taking up too much room.
Yes, Sundar.
Thank you so much for your very inspiring perspective. My only thing is I'd like to just change that from radical philanthropy to just radical thinking. It's got nothing to do with philanthropy. So why do it from the foundation? This is more, I look at this as more a statement of how the world should be.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Foundation
Right.
for a better world, not
Yes.
really.
Thank you.
Uh,
Yep. Yeah, and this happens to be a platform we're on, but honestly, in my life and in both our
Of
lives,
course.
but again, I've been in music all my life, so I try, if you went on YouTube and saw my latest song, you'd realize that I was doing it there too, so I am trying to use, and we both are, every place we can to, put out, again, what sadly is radical thought. I mean, hopefully it won't be at some point. Thank you.
Thank you. Last question here, then we'll wrap up.
Hi, I'm Blair Miller. So I actually work with a lot of philanthropists outside of the U.S., so Nigerians, South Africans, Zimbabweans, Indians as well. I'm just curious, like, what is your relationship with philanthropists around the world, sort of non-Western, and are there different ways that they're thinking about philanthropy that you're learning, or vice versa?
Oh, that's such a good question. I mean, we have certainly met and know. I mean, Peggy Delaney is doing incredible work on bringing together the world, the global philanthropists. I mean, hats off to Peggy. Such amazing, amazing ways.
And difficult. It's
right.
not easy. I've been to China with Peggy a few times. She's been, I don't know how many times at this point. But how do you get out of the colonialist frame completely, which is very difficult. When you're talking to anybody from a different culture, you're walking into their culture. You can't possibly know the depth of their story. And so we are so careful about that, and it takes so much time and effort. And again, that, Peggy puts in the time and effort, and she knows I haven't, because I've been to China a few times, and it's a commitment. I mean, you're obviously doing it. You can know how complex it is only because you don't want to be prescriptive or say this is how we do it. You almost even don't want to say this is how we do it because you're afraid you'll be taken too seriously in a way. You just want to, again, offer up possibilities, not to say this is how you do it. And it's a really delicate thing. So hats off to anybody. And this is why, I mean, we love being here, but it's important to put that out there, that all we're doing is telling our story. This should not be your story, or it should not be at all prescriptive.
Great. Well, that brings us to an end. It's always very thoughtful. You always give us so much to think about and reflect on. Thank you for your honesty and your humility, and thanks for joining us.
Yep. Thank you.